Hey, Bruce Naylor here, your boomer consumer, and today I'm going to be answering some of the top questions that are asking me about the Sony FDR-AX53. Now, a couple years ago, I made a video on how to get the best 4K footage from this camera, and it's just been one of the most popular videos that I've ever done. And to this day, I keep getting questions about because this has been so successful in the marketplace. I don't know how many Sony has sold, but I would guesstimate in the millions of these things. And for good reason. 4K for under 1K. And a device that allows you to capture really unlimited footage. And it is so brain dead easy to use. So let's get into it and talk a little bit about this camcorder. Now, it might be handy to know that this is considered a Sony Handycam, one of the family members of Handycams. And in 2014, Sony introduced the FDR-AX100, which is a semi-professional camcorder with a 1-inch sensor, built-in ND filters, and full manual control over the functions of the camera. The next year, in 2015, Sony introduced the AX33 4K for 1K, but designed as a consumer-friendly camcorder as opposed to semi-professional, and therefore Sony felt a lot of the features that were on the AX100 were not necessary on this camera. A year later, they introduced the Sony FDR-AX53 with major changes to the sensor, larger pixels, a 16:9 format, for example, just other improvements on the camera, as well as, I think, an upgraded processor. This is sold, as I said, I'm sure, in the millions, and I have gotten a number of questions, and I kind of broke these up into categories that will address some of the top concerns and questions that people have about this camera. One of the first category questions revolve around trying to use this camera in a more professional way by inquiring about all the manual settings on this camera. And what Sony has done is they've taken a cripple hammer to it, if you will, more likely to protect the more expensive lines of semi-professional camcorders, and they got rid of features that they thought the average consumer would need. This camera and to this day is really marketed more, towards belonging to, being used by a family or whatever to, record sports games or home movies, home video, etc. That's what it was kind of designed for, and it's got one of the most brain-dead simple menus. You don't even need to consult a manual really how to figure this thing out. Unlike this Sony A6400, which has, by gosh, one of the most complicated menu systems I've ever seen. But of course, you get a lot more functionality when you give people more options and control over the camera. What Sony has done is allow you a certain amount of manual control at any one time on this camera. For example, you can set the shutter speed or shutter priority mode. You can set it in aperture priority mode, which they call the aperture and iris on a camcorder. You can set the ISO, or what they call gain, on this separately. But everything else will become automatic. And that can be problematic for people, for example, trying to take video at night, or I should say during the daytime when it's really bright. In fact, one of the questions is about that. Somebody's trying to record I think a soccer game, and they notice a lot of problem with motion blur. Well, the solution is to use this camera in shutter priority mode, knowing that everything else is going to be fully automatic, but then using a variable ND filter on it. So that's the only way you're really going to accomplish that and control that shutter speed. And in fact, if I were setting this up for a vlogging machine, that's exactly how I would do it. Now, something else, it has face tracking and it has really good autofocus, but it is not the phase detection autofocus. It's not dual pixel. It is contrast based. It's very good and it's relatively fast, but it's not really as good as what I've got on the A6400. However, it is an improvement over the predecessor AX100. But here's the thing about the face tracking on this camera. One of the ways Sony took a cripple hammer to it was if you create a custom white balance on this camera, you lose face tracking. If you set this to manual exposure. And it's not really true in the sense that you can control the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter speed independently, but rather like all as one unit by adjusting a ring on the front of the camera, you will lose face tracking. If you set the white balance to custom, you will also lose face tracking. So I'm not sure why Sony done it that way, but I'm pretty sure it was to protect their market share as far as, or their market for the more prosumer cameras. Another question I get from time to time, will the camera overheat after prolonged use? And I can honestly say that I've used it I've recorded outside in pretty warm weather and for up to 2 hours, and it did not overheat at any given time. So that is a non-issue. And if you do have a problem with overheating on this camera, if it's under warranty, I would definitely get with Sony to get it repaired. Now, another series of questions I get is about, well, can I take photos with this camera? Yes, you can take photos. I don't think they turn out that great. I've not had good experience with it. Your mileage may vary, but what I do is if I know I'm going to be taking photos from, say, something that's fast moving, I will record it as a video file, then take a still from that video file. Still an 8 megapixel 4K still. I think it looks pretty good at that point. I've also been asked about recording limits on this camera, and no, there's really not any limits. You're just limited to the battery life of the camera and also the size of your SD storage card. I think what that stems from is a lot of people have heard that, there's like a 30-minute record limit on cameras. Well, on a lot of DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, there are 30-minute record limits, but on camcorders, this is one of the beauty of getting a camcorder is to have that pretty much unlimited recording time, only limited to your storage space and your battery life. To reiterate, people complaining about getting jittery motion with these, especially in brighter light conditions, and that is because of the camera working in full auto mode. It's also constantly adjusting the shutter speed. You don't want that when you're recording video. You really want to maintain a consistent shutter speed with this camera. And that's why I recommend that you use it in shutter priority mode. And face tracking should work for you in that. And then you do have the ability to somewhat adjust the white balance and the exposure in small increments. Was an AE shift is what it's called, auto exposure shift. You can shift it down, I think, by a stop or up a stop without affecting the face tracking on here, but it's still not the same thing as full manual control of the camera. So if I was going to take this out and shoot outside in fairly bright conditions, this has a 55mm thread on the front of it, and I would definitely recommend getting a variable ND filter. And I've seen them anywhere from $36 on up on B&H Photo. That I think would be a pretty wise investment if you're going to do a lot of video outside. I would either put this in full auto as long as it's not too bright outside, or use a variable ND and set to shutter priority mode. Another question I get asked all the time has to deal with low light conditions. How does the camera do in low light conditions? Well, first off, it has a relatively small sensor, it's a 1/2.5 sensor. So that being said, you're going to need to better light your interior for video at night. However, I don't think it does all that terrible. You will notice a little bit of noise in darker conditions with this camera, but I think all in all, it's not too bad. I would just be more thoughtful about the lighting conditions at night, especially if I'm videoing people and events at night. Definitely probably want to improve your lighting game to get the best possible quality out of this camera. Now, one thing that would surprise you is the number of people I get inquiring about what gimbal to use with this. And I'm like, did you not understand that it comes with essentially a built-in gimbal? That's right, these have what's called the balanced optical steady shot, a 5-axis stabilizer built internally into the camera. You don't need a gimbal. What you do need to know about this camera, with the steady shot system on the camera, there's 3 different settings for this. Well, 4 if you consider off. There's standard, which allows the lens to move up and down, side to side, etc. And then there's active steady shot. And what that does is it crops in a little bit on the image, not really electronic, it's not IBIS, but like electronic stable. Yeah, it just kind of crops in a little bit. And then there's active intelligent steady shot, but that is deactivated in 4K, so you can't use the active intelligent steady shot. But I find just with active steady shot with the Boss system, this thing is super smooth. You do not need a gimbal. That's one of the advantages of the AX53 over its competitors, and probably one of the reasons why it sells so many of them. Another question I get all the time, because YouTube being global, is especially when I did this video, was, well, how come you've got 24 frames a second and we have 25 on our camera? How do I get 24 instead of 25? Is there a way to set this camera from PAL, which is a European format camera, to NTSC, which is the American standard? No, there is no setting on here. Now, there might be a hack that you can get off of GitHub. I'm not recommending that one way or the other, and I have no experience with it. But these are basically country and regionally built and sold. And no, if you get the American version, you can't set it to PAL, and if you get the European version, you can't set it to NTSC. So make sure that you get the format that you want for your area. Now, another category of questions I get all the time have to deal with vlogging. Is this camera a good vlogging camera? And I gotta say, for the most part, yes, with caveats. And one of the major ones is going to be the fact that it doesn't have a very wide lens. And, vloggers tend to kind of hold the camera close so their voice gets picked up on their external microphone. I get that. And normally they're going to use a camera with an interchangeable lens or with a wider field of view than what this provides. It's about 28 millimeter full frame equivalent, which means you got to hold the camera a little bit further away so people can kind of see what's going on behind you. That's one of the downshots of the camera. But if you can live with that, then I think you're going to be fine. The other thing is you don't have really true total manual control over this camera. So therefore, the best solution, especially for daytime vlogging, would be to get a variable ND filter for this thing and set it to shutter priority mode. And as far as recording in 4K, do so to your heart's content. I don't know if most vlogs really need to be in 4K, but you certainly have that capability. Battery life is actually pretty good on this camera. I've not had any real issues with that, but stick to reputable. If you get replacement batteries or spare batteries, make sure you deal with a reputable company. I have some extended batteries, and they were not very good. They didn't last very long keeping their charge. So have extra batteries. And if you can afford it, I still recommend getting the genuine Sony batteries and have 1 or 2 of those as spares, and you will be golden at that point. Those are the main things that I wanted to talk about on this camera. I think it's a fantastic value for under $1,000. You can save around $100 or more on the price of the new AX43. I know somebody probably mentioned that. The major difference is they got rid of this viewfinder. They found most people, I don't use the viewfinder. I use the flippy screen. That's what I use. This is my flippy screen. And so why pay for something you're not going to use? So Sony and the AX43 got rid of that. But essentially, it's the same hardware and software on it. And this thing is just so easy to use. So I didn't want to get a lot of technical stuff about this camera. There's plenty of videos on that. I made a good video. I hope you'll like it, about how to get the best possible video quality out of this camera. Link to that down below in the description. And if you are looking to pick one of these up for yourself, then I'll have my Amazon affiliate link down below for that as well. And that's it. Bruce Naylor, your Boomer Consumer. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.